Welcome back. With this video, we will begin to take a closer look at Silent Hill 2. As the plot summary in the last video has already shown, Silent Hill 2 is a complex work from the horror genre that combines themes like guilt and redemption with a deeply unsettling atmosphere and various psychological elements such as repression, psychological drives, or the unconscious mind, which might have been based on or inspired by European psychology. Now, in the following videos, we shall discuss the various visual, auditive, and narrative elements that combine to create the unique experience that is Silent Hill 2. Amongst other things, we will examine how exactly the game creates its distinctive and often uncanny atmosphere, and we will also analyze the various psychological elements to see how they contribute to it all. And in today's video, we will start with the letter. Right from the very beginning, the game confronts us with something uncanny in the form of Mary's letter. A letter in and of itself shouldn't be particularly scary. However, the claim that this letter was sent to James by a person who died 3 years ago turns this letter, normally a familiar everyday object, into something irrational, something that shouldn't be, and connects it to the unknown, to the world of the dead. We learn of the contents of the letter before James even tells us who allegedly sent it to him. Right after he left the rundown restroom and can be seen looking down on Silent Hill and the large lake Toluca, Mary's disembodied voice begins to read the letter to us. I will now quote the Japanese text of this letter and give a more literal translation than the official English one. Please note that this has nothing to do with the quality of the official English text. Silent Hill 2's localization is very good in my opinion. The English version of Mary's letter sounds beautiful and poetic. However, the official English text actually differs slightly from the Japanese text in a few places, and that is why I want to focus on the exact phrasing from the Japanese letter, because some of these differences are actually quite interesting. So it goes as follows. 曖昧な眠りの中で夢見るのはあの街サイレントヒル which translates to In my restless sleep, I dream of that town, Silent Hill. Now, the Japanese word nemori, sleep or slumber, that appears in the first line can also be used as a euphemism for death, especially when used in connection with words like eien, which means eternal. So you can say eien no nemori in Japanese, just like you can say eternal sleep in English to refer to death. And since Mary is already dead, I would assume that this particular choice of words was intentional in Japanese. The letter then continues. いつかまた二人で行こうと約束しておきながら私のせいで叶わなかった That translates to, we promised each other to go there again one day, but it is my fault that this never came true. Or, but because of me, this never came true. And this part in particular is why I wanted to show you a more literal translation, because in the Japanese letter, Mary says it was her fault that they could never go back to Silent Hill. Finally, the last part reads, 私は一人でそこにいる。あの思い出の場所であなたを待っている。Which finally translates to, I'm alone there in that special place, waiting for you, which is more or less what the official English text says too. Now, first of all, this letter, combined with James' claim that it came from his dead wife, serves as a clever deception. We are presented with a romantic scenario of a seemingly innocent and tragic husband who lost his wife to a terrible disease and decided to follow the calling of her letter from beyond the grave because he misses her so much and desperately wants to see her again. Within minutes, we have learned of the death of a beloved one and of the hope to be reunited with her with the help of supernatural forces. This emotional exposition helps the player to immediately empathize with the character they are going to control throughout the game. The fact that the game gives the player an objective that ultimately turns out to have been a deception from the start, namely to find Mary and reunite with her, puts the player into the same situation as James, so that the repeated clues that hint at James' repressed memories will appear just as mysterious and confusing to the player as to James. It is only when these memories are brought to the surface later into the game that the player will be able to realize that James' repressed guilt was the true reason for this journey. This repressed guilt might also play into some of the character traits that James displays throughout the game. For example, James doesn't show much happiness and instead appears rather downcast and depressed. If you examine some bottles of wine in an aisle, he makes a depressed-sounding remark about having tried to kill his grief with alcohol many times in the past. On top of that, he often seems somewhat naive, slow-witted, and even childlike at times. When Maria reaches for a key inside her clothes, he acts not like an adult, but like a little pubescent boy, trying to get a peek at something exciting that he's never seen before. And both of these things might be related to the repression of his memories, since they would be helpful to it. For one, after the act of murder, he may have felt relief and happiness at finally being free from the burden of his sick wife. But when the weight of his crime became too heavy and his psyche began repressing it all, then in order to fully repress all memories of the murder, it might have been necessary to repress all these positive feelings as well, thus leaving all the more room for the sadness and grief that certainly must have been present too. Similarly, in order to hinder the ability to be made aware of his crime again, his mind may in turn have caused him to regress into a forced state of naive ignorance so as to make it more difficult for the repressed thoughts to return. I mean, of course, we cannot rule out that James is just a somewhat naive and dim-witted guy, but it's also possible that the guilt might have caused him to unconsciously regress to a more simple state of mental capacity. And indeed, according to Sigmund Freud, the human mind can regress to an earlier developmental stage as an unconscious defense mechanism to protect it from something that it does not want to face. So even though the idea might be a stretch, it is not entirely unfounded.
I'm looking for Mary. Have you seen her?
But okay, returning to the letter itself. As mentioned earlier, what is particularly noteworthy about the Japanese phrasing of Mary's letter is that it blames Mary for the fact that they never returned to Silent Hill. The Japanese text clearly states, "We promised each other to go there again one day, but it is my fault that this never came true." Watashi no sei literally means because of me. Perhaps it's all in his head, and him seeing the letter and believing he received it is an attempt of his repressed memories to resurface. Or perhaps the letter is an actual invitation fabricated by the town of Silent Hill itself to lure James into its realm. But no matter how you want to interpret it, I do think that what exactly James sees in the letter is also tied to his own mental state. So the fact that the first version of the letter, the one that James reads when he is fully repressing his memories, contains a line in which Mary is made responsible for their failure to fulfill the promise to return to Silent Hill once more, could be another hint at James' strong resistance to the uncovering of his repressed memories at the start of the game. That is to say, in order to keep up the repression of his own guilt, his mind might work to blame Mary instead of himself for being unable to return to Silent Hill, and therefore puts these words into her mouth. Weirdly enough, the official English version of this letter not only leaves out the part where the letter actively blames Mary, but instead has a more accusatory tone towards James. In English, this passage reads, "You promised you'd take me there again someday, but you never did." I'm not sure why this difference exists, but as stated before, the Japanese text clearly has Mary explain that because of her the promise never came true, which could indeed represent James' unconscious mind pushing all the blame away from him. One more point I would like to bring up before I end this chapter is related to my statement that I think the contents of the letter are tied to James' own mental state, because this is actually supported by the fact that the closer the player gets to the truth, the more of the letter actually disappears in-game until at the very end it's completely gone. The game does this in a very clever and subtle way. Mary's letter is actually one of James' inventory items, but after the introduction, the player is never explicitly pointed towards the letter again. You can play the entire game without noticing that the letter slowly changes form in your inventory, only if the player realizes that they still carry the letter with them and decides to occasionally take a look at it will they notice that it changes over time. First, the words disappear and we only see a blank sheet of paper in an envelope. Next, the sheet of paper vanishes and we only carry the envelope with us. And finally, towards the end of the game, even the envelope has disappeared from our inventory. It's a fascinating narrative device and not the only moment in the game where something is handled with clever subtlety. But okay, this seems like a good place to stop. In the next video, we will take a look at how the spatial design within Silent Hill 2 can be seen as a representation of James' psyche. I hope to see you there. And as always, take care and goodbye.